Anger. That spark that ignites in a second and can burn down everything you love. Have you felt it? A careless word, a look you didn't expect, a silence you interpreted as contempt. In less than an instant, your heart races, your mind fabricates comebacks, and your calm vanishes. And the worst part? Many times, after the explosion, comes regret. But let me ask you something. What if the real enemy isn't what happens outside, but how your mind interprets it? That comment that hurt you, that attitude that offended you. What if it wasn't really them, but your own broken reflection that turned a spark into a storm? In this series of 10 lessons, you are going to discover something powerful. Anger is not your master, it is only a visitor, and you have the power to decide how long it stays. Together, we'll go on a journey that starts with that spark threatening to burn everything down and ends with a very different fire. A fire of calm, of influence, of peace so strong it can spread to those around you. Here, you will not only understand why you get angry, but you will also learn to use silence as a shield, to release the resentment that chains you, to set boundaries that protect your peace, to rewrite your mind with new words, and to keep your composure even in chaotic environments. And in the end, you'll discover something greater, how your serenity can become light for others. Now think about this. How many arguments, how many opportunities, how many relationships could you have saved if you had known how to control that spark in time? Stay until the end, because each lesson is a key. And when you hold all 10 in your hands, you won't just have learned to master anger, you'll have discovered a new way of living. Lesson 1. Imagine your life as an invisible battlefield. There are no armies or swords, but every day you fight silent wars against an enemy you cannot see, an enemy that lives inside you. Anger. One spark is enough to start a wildfire. A gesture, a word, a misinterpreted look. What seemed like a normal day suddenly becomes a storm. Picture this. You're sitting in a meeting. Everything seems calm until someone, with a sarcastic tone, throws a comment about what you just said. It wasn't a direct insult, just a poorly placed remark. Yet within seconds, your chest tightens, your heart races, and your mind starts building an army of responses. What could have been a small detail turns into a personal attack. Here's the truth. The spark itself was never the problem. It wasn't the word or the condescending glance. It was what your mind did with it. In an instant, you built a story. They're underestimating me. They don't respect me. They're mocking me in front of everyone. That story became the gasoline that fueled the fire. That's how anger works. It doesn't need major triggers. It seeps into the everyday, in traffic delays, in an unanswered message, in the serious face of someone who might have just been lost in thought. Suddenly, you interpret it as an offense. Here comes the great trap. We think exploding gives us power, yelling, slamming the table, throwing fiery looks. But in reality, every outburst is a public confession of weakness. It is like shouting to the world, anyone can control me with a simple gesture. Because when you react like that, you are not in control. You've handed over the wheel of your life to the first wave that hits your ship. Now imagine that ship in the middle of a storm. The captain can't control the wind or the waves. He doesn't decide when the storm arrives, but he can decide how he holds the wheel. If he jerks it recklessly, the ship breaks. If he breathes, observes, and holds it firmly, the storm is still harsh, but the ship endures. That captain is you every time anger appears. Anger wears disguises. It dresses up as courage, as justice, even as authenticity. It convinces you that exploding is necessary, that shouting to defend yourself makes you strong. But the truth is the opposite. Every time you give in, you lose control. Think about the last time you argued and ended up saying things you later regretted. Maybe you felt momentary relief, but then came shame, emptiness, guilt. That's the trap. Anger promises freedom, but delivers slavery. We've all seen these scenes. The coworker who explodes at every meeting, convinced that raising his voice earns respect. The father who yells at a small mistake, thinking he's teaching discipline. The partner who turns a simple disagreement into an endless battle, believing that's self-respect. But they're not showing strength. They're showing an inability to govern themselves. Because if you can't control yourself, you control nothing. There's always a decisive moment. that second after the spark, that tiny space where your blood boils and your pulse races. That's where everything is defined. If you react instantly, you're a slave to your impulse. If you breathe, count to 10, and choose your response, you own yourself. It may sound simple, even naive, but that pause is the bridge between destruction and clarity. Think of someone who can irritate you with just a gesture. What does that mean? That person has found a hidden button in you, and they can press it whenever they want. Do you really want to be that predictable, that easy to manipulate? Every time you give in to anger, you become a toy for whoever lit your spark. That is not power. It's slavery. Mastering anger doesn't happen overnight. It's constant training, like strengthening a muscle. The first time you decide not to react, you'll feel uncomfortable, even weak. But little by little, you'll discover that silence is strength. At first, it's like practicing martial arts. Your movements are clumsy, uncertain. But with repetition, you gain precision and control. That's how it works with anger. Every pause is a master strike against emotional slavery. And it's not about repressing what you feel. It's about choosing when and how to respond. Because anger will always try to make you believe that if you don't explode, you're a coward. But the reality is the opposite. True power is not reacting, it's deciding. You're not strong because you answer back. You're strong because you choose what deserves your energy and what doesn't. We see it in daily life all the time. Someone loses control in traffic and shouts from their car. Another ruins their whole day because a message wasn't answered. Another spends hours replaying a comment from work. What do they all have in common? They've surrendered their peace to something external. And the more you think about it, the clearer it becomes. Anger doesn't come from what happens, it comes from the interpretation you choose to give it. The wise knew this well. Seneca said that uncontrolled anger is often more harmful than the offense that provoked it. Every shout, every harsh word, every slammed door wounds the one who explodes first. It's like drinking poison and expecting it to kill the other person. This first lesson is just the beginning. Today we open the door to look straight at the fire within. And if you want to continue this path of self-mastery, make sure to subscribe right now and hit the bell. That way, you won't miss a single lesson, and together we'll walk this journey of transformation. Because here comes the big question. If we all know anger destroys us, why do we keep falling into it again and again? The answer isn't in the world or in others, or in provocations. The answer lies in something invisible you silently carry, your expectations. And that's what we'll explore in the next lesson. Lesson 3. The ego, the enemy disguised as pride. Imagine someone corrects you in front of others. It wasn't an insult or a direct attack, just a small correction. But inside, something burns. You can't stand the idea that others might think you were wrong. It bothers you that your image isn't perfect, that your voice wasn't the last word. That discomfort turning into anger didn't come from the correction. It came from your wounded ego. The ego is that invisible actor demanding the lead role in every scene. It's the voice that says, they must acknowledge me, they must respect me, they must give me my place. And every time life doesn't meet those demands, the ego rises in anger. It doesn't need big reasons. It's enough that someone doesn't greet you, another gets more attention than you, or your effort goes unnoticed. The ego is like a proud guard who can't tolerate a single crack in his armor. Every time someone touches that armor, even gently, it reacts as if under attack. It can't stand being ignored, not being the center, not being right. What's most dangerous about the ego is that it wears a disguise. It doesn't present itself as empty pride, but as justice. It whispers, what you're asking for is fair. You deserve better treatment. You deserve respect. And while there may be some truth in that, the problem is that it turns every detail into an offense. Every oversight into betrayal, every silence into contempt. The ego convinces you you're not asking for much, when in reality, it's just hungry for constant feeding. Think of the last time someone received recognition for work you also did. Maybe they applauded that person and didn't mention you. What did you feel? Was it truly that serious? Or was it your ego shouting, what about me? I deserve to be up there too. That sting, that irritation, didn't come from the situation. It came from the ego claiming a throne. Examples are everywhere. The person who interrupts in a meeting just to prove they know more. The one who can stand losing an argument and needs the last word even when it makes no sense. The one who sulks because they weren't invited to an event, even though deep down they didn't really want to go. All are reflections of an ego that demands attention, like a spoiled child pounding the table to be seen. The ego is an invisible prison. It makes you believe that if you're not recognized, you lose value. If you're not right, you lose respect. If you're not at the center, you disappear. And then you react with anger, not because you were harmed, but because your pride can't tolerate the shadows. Here's the paradox. The bigger the ego, the more fragile you are. Anything can break you. A comment, an omission, a gesture. A person with an inflated ego lives like a glass filled to the brim. The smallest drop makes it overflow. The slightest sign of inattention is enough to make them explode. Picture an overinflated balloon. From the outside it looks big, strong, imposing, but a tiny needle can burst it. That's the ego. The more you inflate it with demands, the easier it is for anything to pop it. And every burst is an anger that eats you from within. The Stoics were clear on this. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "When someone offends or irritates you, remember it is your opinion that hurts you. That opinion is born of the ego, which turns a neutral event into a personal attack. The ego is the mirror that always seeks flattering reflections. If the mirror returns applause, it swells. If it returns silence, it shatters. And when it shatters, anger appears. It's as if your worth hung by a thread in others' hands. If they praise you, you rise. If they ignore you, you fall. You are not your own master. You are a prisoner of what others do or don't see in you." What is hardest is recognizing that the ego enslaves us even in small things. The person who constantly interrupts because they can stand not being heard. The one who brags over and over, afraid their achievements will be forgotten. The one who gets upset if every decision isn't run by them. All are driven by the same root, the fear of being invisible. The ego is skilled at disguising itself as nobility. Sometimes it shows up as defense of honor. You say, it's not pride, it's dignity. And while the line between the two can be thin, many times what you call dignity is just your ego asking to be fed. True dignity doesn't need to shout, impose, or seek external recognition. True dignity is calm because it stands on its own, without applause. Imagine two people arguing. One fights to have the last word, to prove they're always right. The other listens, answers calmly, and refuses to be provoked. Who is stronger? The one who shouts seems imposing but is a slave to ego. The one who keeps quiet and chooses their battles appears silent but is master of self. Real power isn't a T in the volume of your voice, it's in the calm of your spirit. Here's what's curious. When someone has their ego under control, they stop getting angry over small things. They no longer feel everything as a personal attack. They can hear criticism without crumbling. They can be ignored without losing their value. They can go unrecognized and keep working with excellence. Because they understand their worth doesn't depend on what others say, it depends on what they know about themselves. Real freedom begins when you no longer need to feed the ego, when you can say, I don't need to be right all the time. I don't need applause. I don't need to be at the center. And in that instant, you discover something powerful. The peace you were looking for wasn't in others recognizing you. It was in you learning to let go of your pride. Think of an argument with someone close. Both want to win. Both raise their voice. Both try to impose their point. What remains at the end? A wound deeper than before, a greater distance. All because of ego's whim, which turned a disagreement into a power struggle. But when one decides to let go, when one chooses to listen instead of shout, something changes. It's not weakness, it's strength. The truly strong don't need to prove it. Ego fuels much of our anger because it always wants more. More attention, more respect, more recognition, more victories. And life isn't always willing to give it. That's why ego lives angry, like a perpetual hunger that's never satisfied. If you want freedom from anger, you must face this invisible enemy. You need to recognize that not everything you feel as an offense truly is. Not everything you interpret as contempt is real. Many times you're not angry at others. You're angry because your pride is hurt. The most transformative discovery is realizing the ego loses power when you name it. When you can say, "This feeling isn't dignity, it's my ego asking to be fed." Once you recognize it, it can't manipulate you the same way. You start choosing your battles with clarity. And now the big question. What happens when the ego becomes a broken mirror? What happens when every wound to your pride makes you reflect anger back at others, as if they were guilty of your inner cracks? That's the journey of the next lesson. To look at the broken mirror within. Because when ego goes unchallenged, it doesn't just ignite anger, it distorts the way we see others. The next step is to discover how that broken mirror warps reality and fuels resentments that feel impossible to release. Lesson 4. The broken mirror. Imagine looking into a cracked mirror. Your face appears distorted, fragmented into 1,000 pieces. Some parts look larger than they are, others smaller, and some don't even reflect clearly. The curious thing is, you're not broken. The mirror is. But if you forget that, you start believing you really are that deformed version. That is how a wounded ego works. It turns your vision into a broken mirror that distorts reality, exaggerates offenses, enlarges slights, and multiplies wounds that may never have existed. Anger often doesn't arise from what's in front of you, but from how you see it. Your perception becomes that broken mirror, magnifying the negative and shrinking the positive. It is like living in a house with foggy windows. Everything you see is clouded by your own inner mist. And until you clean those windows, you'll swear the world is dark, when in truth the darkness is within you. Think about everyday life. Someone speaks to you quickly because they're busy, but your broken mirror translates it as, "They're mad at me, they despise me." A friend forgets a detail, and your mirror reflects, "I don't matter, they've never valued me." Your partner stays silent in a conversation, and your broken mirror screams, "They're ignoring me, rejecting me." The problem isn't them, it's your reflection. The broken mirror feeds on old wounds. Each past disappointment leaves a crack. Each betrayal, abandonment, or painful word etched itself into the glass. And over time, instead of seeing life with freshness, you see it through those fractures. You don't see what's truly there. You see echoes of what was done to you. The Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Life is what our thoughts make of it." If your mirror is broken, your thoughts warp everything you look at. And if everything you see is distorted, your whole life becomes a battlefield. Here is the hardest truth. The broken mirror doesn't only distort how you see others, it distorts how you see yourself. You begin to believe you're worth less, that rejection is inevitable, that you'll never be enough. Each crack returns a fragmented version of your identity. Unless you recognize this, you'll keep fighting enemies that don't exist and punishing yourself for flaws that aren't real. The broken mirror is dangerous, not just because it distorts, but because it cuts. Touch it carelessly, and it wounds you. That's how damaged perceptions work. They wound your relationships, your choices, your peace. But healing doesn't come by gluing every shard back in a day. It begins by recognizing, "I've been looking through a broken mirror." That simple awareness is the first step toward clarity. The Stoic teaching is clear. You can't stop life from hitting you, but you can decide how you look at those hits. You can't erase the past, but you can clean the glass through which you see the present. Until you do, you'll keep mistaking cracks for attacks, broken reflections for objective reality. And here is the next question. What happens when you choose silence in front of your broken mirror? Not silence as resignation, but as strength. Silence that doesn't fuel distortion, but begins to heal the glass. That's the theme of the next lesson, the power of silence. You'll discover that silence is not weakness, but one of the strongest weapons against anger and distorted perception. Because sometimes the greatest act of strength is not speaking, but choosing not to react. Lesson 5. The power of silence. Imagine you're in the middle of a heated argument. The other person raises their voice, gestures forcefully, tries to provoke you. You feel the blood rush to your face, your heart pounds violently, and the temptation to respond grows stronger and stronger. Your mind screams, "Defend yourself, don't let them, respond in kind." But instead of exploding, you choose to be silent. You breathe, you observe, and that silence, which at first seems like weakness, becomes an impenetrable shield. The other person keeps shouting, but you are no longer part of the fire. You discover that sometimes the greatest act of power is not a word, but silence. Anger always seeks noise. It wants to push you to react, to respond immediately, to hit back blow for blow. But when you choose silence, you break the cycle. Silence is like an invisible wall that keeps the other person's fire from burning your insides. And although from the outside some may think you've given up, the truth is that you've just won the most important battle, the one you fought within yourself. What's curious is that many confuse silence with cowardice. They believe that keeping quiet means accepting defeat. But the kind of silence we're talking about here is not resignation. It's strategy. It is not escape. It's self-control. It is not submission. It's contained strength. Because anyone can shout, anyone can react. But only the strong are capable of choosing not to. Think of the times the noise of anger led you to say things you later regretted. Words that should never have left your mouth. Phrases that wounded those you love most. Every time that happened, you surely wished you'd had the ability to keep quiet, to stop yourself a second before disaster. Silence in those moments wouldn't have been empty. It would have been protection. Silence is like a glass of water thrown on a fire. It puts it out instead of fanning it. If you respond with shouting, the fire multiplies. If you choose silence, the fire consumes itself, not because it doesn't exist, but because you didn't give it oxygen. The other person's anger needs your reaction to grow. If you don't give it, it withers. Imagine two people face to face. One hurls insults like arrows. The other listens without returning a single one. The first gets tired, runs out of arguments, ends up talking to themselves. The second remains firm, calm, not allowing the arrows to pierce their skin. Who is stronger? Not the one who shouted the loudest, but the one who didn't allow themselves to be dragged into the same mud. Silence also has a transformative power within you. When you choose to keep quiet, you not only avoid hurting others, you also give yourself time to understand what you really feel. Because many times what seems like anger is disguised sadness, hidden fear, concealed insecurity. If you speak in the midst of the fire, those emotions are buried under the ashes of your hurtful words. But if you keep quiet, if you breathe, if you listen within, you can recognize what lies behind the anger. And that recognition is the beginning of healing. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus said, "It is not what happens to you that harms you, but your reaction to it." Silence is precisely that pause that allows you not to react immediately, but to respond with wisdom later. Silence is the doorway that separates the slave of impulse from the true master of themselves. Think of everyday life. A driver cuts you off in traffic. Your first impulse is to honk, shout, insult. In contrast, if you get drawn into the game, you can spend the rest of the day carrying that useless rage. The same happens at home. Someone says something in a harsh tone. Your immediate reaction could be to hit back verbally. But if you choose silence, the argument often dies before it's born. Silence doesn't always mean never speaking. Sometimes it means waiting for the right moment. Keeping silent at the moment of anger so you can speak later with clarity. Because there are words that are said best when the fire is no longer burning. Words that build instead of destroy. Imagine a pot of boiling water. If you seal the lid tightly and let the pressure keep rising, sooner or later it will explode. But if you lift the lid slightly and let steam escape at the right moment, everything stabilizes. That is silence. It is not repressing forever. It is regulating the pressure so you don't explode at the worst moment. What's curious is that silence also unmasks others. Many people wait for your reaction to justify their own. If you shout, they already have an excuse to shout more. If you insult, they have a reason to continue. But if you keep silent, they're left to face themselves. They see themselves reflected in their own noise. And many times it's that reflection that stops them. Silence is uncomfortable because it breaks the script of conflict. The other person expected a fight, expected a war, expected resistance. But when they don't find it, they're disarmed. And in that instant, you regain control. Because true strength is not in controlling others, but in controlling yourself. Of course, it's not always easy. Silence hurts at first. It feels like swallowing your pride, like letting an injustice pass, like losing ground. But over time, you discover you didn't lose anything. In fact, you gained everything. Because you kept your peace, your energy, your power. And that's worth more than any victory in an empty argument. Examples abound. The parent who, instead of yelling at their child, chooses to keep quiet and speak calmly later. The worker who hears an unfair criticism and, instead of responding with anger, keeps silent and later proves their worth with actions. The couple who, in the midst of conflict, choose to keep quiet and wait to talk when both are calm. Those silences, which from the outside seem small, are in reality giant victories. Silence is also a form of resistance. You don't feed the other person's fire, but you don't surrender either. You remain firm, present, master of yourself. And that kind of silence, far from being empty, is full of strength. It is the silence of the warrior who knows when to speak and when not to. Now imagine a forest in flames. If you run in fear and accidentally pour gasoline, the fire will consume everything. But if you choose to wait for the rain, if you choose not to feed the fire, little by little the flames extinguish themselves. That is the power of silence. It doesn't destroy in an instant, but it prevents the blaze from growing. Silence is an act of wisdom, because not every thought deserves to become words. Many times what you want to say in anger is not true, not fair, not necessary. They are poisoned words you would later regret. Silence gives you time to filter, to separate what is worth saying from what is better left to die in your mind. And here comes the most revealing part. Silence not only protects your relationships, it also protects your health. Each outburst of anger raises your blood pressure, accelerates your heart, drains your energy. Silence, on the other hand, calms your system, restores balance to your body, allows you to maintain clarity. It's not just an emotional strategy, it's also a physical medicine. What's curious is that the more you practice silence, the more you discover you don't need to win every battle. That not everything deserves a response. That not every provocation is worthy of your energy. And then you understand the sage's phrase, "He who controls others is strong, but he who controls himself is invincible." But a key question arises. What happens when silence turns into accumulated resentment? What happens when you keep quiet but don't heal, and what you keep inside becomes bitterness? That will be the theme of the next chapter. The invisible weight of resentment. We'll discover how repressed anger turns into chains you drag day after day, how misunderstood silence becomes an internal poison, and how to free yourself from it before it consumes your life. Lesson 6. Resentment, the invisible prison. Imagine you carry a backpack every day. At first it weighs little, just a small stone. It doesn't bother you much. You can walk with it just fine. But every time someone hurts you, every time you feel life has been unfair to you, you put another stone inside. Day after day, week after week, month after month. After a while, you no longer remember how many stones are in that backpack. You only know it's so heavy that each step exhausts you. Every movement hurts. That backpack is resentment. An invisible weight you drag even if no one sees it, even if you smile on the outside, even if you say you've moved on. Resentment doesn't appear all at once. It is born in silence, like a whisper in the heart. Someone offends you and you choose to keep quiet, but inside you hold on to the wound. Someone fails you and you swear you've forgotten, but deep down you write it on a mental to-do list. Little by little, those memories accumulate, ferment, and turn into a poison you no longer need the other person to give you. You manufacture it yourself and drink it every day. What's curious about resentment is that it disguises itself as justice. You think that by holding on to it, you're balancing the scales, that you're remembering what they did so you won't let it happen again. You think, "I'm not angry, I just don't forget." But the truth is that every time you remember the wound, you relive it. It's as if you were reopening a scar over and over. The other person may no longer even think about it, but you relive it every day. Think of everyday life. That time a coworker took credit for your work, and you still remember it with anger every time you see them. That friend who failed you years ago, and although you still talk, every word they say passes through the filter of that betrayal. That partner who said something cruel, and though you decided to stay, you never looked at them the same way again. Each of those memories is a stone in your backpack, and the more time passes, the heavier the road becomes. Resentment is an invisible prison, because it first locks up the one who carries it. You think that by keeping it you've punished the other, but the real prisoner is you. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, or like locking the door from the inside and then complaining that you can't get out. Now imagine you're holding a burning coal, intending to throw it at someone. While you wait for the perfect moment to throw it, what happens? You burn yourself. That's how resentment works. Every time you hold it, every time you feed it, the flames burn your hands first. The Stoics spoke clearly about this. They said it makes no sense to cling to offenses because by doing so, you prolong your suffering beyond the event itself. The harm happened once, but resentment multiplies it in your mind hundreds of times. It's like watching a painful movie on endless repeat. Resentment also distorts the way you see life. If you hold bitterness against someone, you interpret their every action as confirmation of your wound. If they smile, you think it's hypocrisy. If they talk to you, you believe they have ulterior motives. If they stay silent, you take it as contempt. Resentment turns any gesture into proof of your pain. And then you no longer see the person as they are, but as your wound paints them. What's curious is that resentment often survives even when the other person is no longer there. That person may have been out of your life for years, but you still carry the stone in your backpack. You keep remembering what they did. You keep reacting as if it all happened yesterday. It's like carrying a ghost stuck to your shadow, a ghost only you feed. Think about it. How many times have you found yourself remembering an old offense in moments of calm? Suddenly, in the middle of a normal day, your mind travels to the past and relives the scene. You feel the same anger, the same pain, as if it were present. That's the trap of resentment. It turns the past into an eternal present. Resentment also affects your body. Each bitter memory raises your blood pressure, agitates your heart, drains your energy. It steals your sleep, clouds your clarity, makes you irritable. It's not just an emotional weight, it's also physical wear. It's like carrying a red-hot iron in your chest that never cools. And the cruelest part is that many times the other person doesn't even know you were carrying it. While you waste energy remembering, the other goes on with their life. Maybe they've forgotten. Maybe they never knew how much it hurt you. Resentment then becomes a chain that binds only you. Imagine a prisoner who has the keys to their cell in their pocket but never realizes it. They complain about being locked up, but the door was always ready to open. That's how we are when we carry resentment. We have the key to freedom, but we prefer to remain prisoners of our own anger. The Stoics proposed letting go of what doesn't depend on you. And resentment, as logical as it may seem, never depends on you to change what already happened. The only thing that depends on you is how you choose to carry that wound, as a chain or as a lesson. Here, as what is interesting, letting go of resentment doesn't mean justifying what happened. It doesn't mean approving the offense. It doesn't mean forcing yourself to forget. It means deciding you will no longer give it power over your life. It means stopping carrying the stone in your backpack because you understand it doesn't make you stronger, just slower. What's curious is that when you decide to let go, the wound begins to heal. Not because the memory disappears, but because it no longer has the same power. The coal stops burning you, the backpack gets lighter, the ghost loses strength. And then you discover that true freedom never depended on what the other person did, but on what you chose to do with what happened. Think of concrete examples. The person who held resentment against an absent father for decades and, one day, by letting go, discovered they could finally love without fear. The woman who carried the bitterness of a betrayal and, by deciding to release it, finally slept peacefully after years. The worker who always remembered the injustice of their boss, until one day they understood their future, did not depend on that memory, and they were able to move forward without the chain of rage. Resentment is like an anchor that sinks your ship. You can row with all your strength, but you'll never move forward unless you release it. The sea of your life is waiting, but you remain tied to the bottom. Until you decide to cut that chain, you'll stay in the same place, repeating the same pain. The most liberating thing is realizing that letting go is not a favor to the other person. It is a gift to yourself. Because the first to be freed is you. The one who regains energy, peace, and clarity is you. And that freedom is priceless. But now comes the big question. What happens when you manage to release resentment, but you need to learn to set boundaries so you won't be hurt the same way again? What happens when inner healing requires not only forgiving, but also learning to say, this is as far as it goes? That will be the theme of the next lesson, boundaries. We'll discover how to set clear borders not from anger, but from inner strength. Because letting go of resentment without learning to set boundaries is like opening the cell, but leaving the door without a lock. And if you want to keep your freedom, you need to learn how to protect it. Lesson 7. Boundaries, the rampart of your peace. It begins like this. Think of a garden, a green space, full of flowers, trees, and quiet paths. If you care for it, it blooms. If you neglect it, it withers. But there is something that can never be missing, a fence to protect it. Because if anyone can enter without permission, trample the flowers, pull up the plants, or leave trash, the garden will end up destroyed. Your inner life works the same way. Without boundaries, anyone can come in and steal your peace. Boundaries are not walls of hatred, not barriers of resentment. They are protective ramparts that allow you to decide who enters and how they enter your emotional space. They are the silent language with which you tell the world, here, yes, here, no. This is as far as you go, and beyond this I will not pass. The problem is that many of us were taught that setting boundaries is selfish, that saying no makes you a bad person, that claiming your space is prideful, and so we end up giving in, handing over our peace on a silver platter, accepting everything that's imposed on us. But over time, that lack of boundaries turns into accumulated anger, silent resentment, and outbursts that seem to have no explanation. A boundary is the bridge between forgiveness and protection. You can let go of resentment. You can free yourself from the chains of the past. But if you don't learn to set boundaries, you'll fall into the same patterns again. It's like leaving the door open after taking out the trash. Sooner or later, the bad smell will return. Think of everyday scenes. The boss who always loads you with more work than you can handle. And you, out of fear of saying, no, accept again and again until one day you explode in anger. The friend who is always late and you never say anything until the accumulation of waiting turns into anger. The partner who repeats behaviors you can't tolerate, but instead of drawing a clear boundary, you stay quiet, and then you end up blowing up over any little thing. Anger many times is simply the signal that a boundary has been crossed. And if you don't learn to set them in a healthy way, anger becomes your only language. But a boundary set with calm is much more powerful than an outburst of rage. A boundary isn't shouted, it's lived. You don't need to raise your voice to establish it. Your inner firmness is enough, your clarity when you say, I will not allow this. The one who shouts tries to convince the other. The one who is firm is already convinced. The Stoics spoke of knowing oneself as the basis of all strength. Marcus Aurelius said that no one can take your peace from you if you don't hand it over. And setting boundaries is precisely that, deciding that your peace is not for sale, that it isn't negotiable, that you won't give it up out of fear of rejection or a desire for approval. Think of it as a rampart. It isn't built to imprison your life, but to protect what's valuable inside. A rampart isn't the enemy of freedom, it's its guarantee. Because without protection, your peace is exposed to anyone's whims. What's curious is that many expect others to guess their boundaries. They think that being uncomfortable is enough for the other person to understand. But boundaries don't work that way. They are expressed clearly, upheld firmly, and repeated when necessary. And although at first they may cause discomfort, over time they become mutual respect. The lack of boundaries also creates an internal trap. You begin to get angry at others for taking advantage of you, when in reality you are the one who didn't defend yourself. And that hurts more, because the anger is no longer only outward, it's inward too. You tell yourself, why do I always give in? Why do I never make myself respected? And then the rage multiplies. Learning to set boundaries is learning to say no without guilt. This is as far as it goes without fear. This doesn't serve me without resentment. And it isn't easy, because every boundary awakens discomfort. The other person may get upset, may criticize you, may walk away. But in the end, if someone leaves because you set a boundary, the only thing you lost was someone who wasn't willing to respect you. A boundary not only protects your peace, it also strengthens your identity. Because every time you set one, you remind yourself, I have value, my time matters, my energy is sacred. And that constant repetition builds you from the inside out. Think of someone who never sets boundaries. They always say yes, even when they don't want to. They always accept what they can't stand. They always hold back what they should express. That person becomes a silent volcano, accumulating lava until they explode. And when they explode, they destroy everything around them, even what they wanted to keep. A timely boundary would have prevented the eruption. A boundary is like a valve that regulates the flow of water. If you open it too much, you flood. If you close it completely, you dry out. But if you handle it with balance, you have a river that flows without overflowing. The silence from the previous lesson is powerful, but it needs to be accompanied by boundaries, because keeping quiet without setting limits becomes resignation. And resignation isn't peace, it's temporary anesthesia. True peace is born when you choose when to be silent and when to speak, when to let go and when to draw the line. Boundaries are also a gift to others, because when you set them clearly, you help people know how far they can go with you. You teach them how to treat you, and at the same time, you teach them how to treat themselves. Those who don't know how to respect their own boundaries, don't know how to respect those of others either. Here's something important. Setting boundaries doesn't mean cutting off relationships. It means healing them. Because every healthy relationship has implicit rules of respect. When those are missing, the bond gets sick. Far from destroying, a boundary strengthens what is worth keeping. And here I want to pause to invite you to something. If this message is resonating with you, subscribe to the channel now and turn on the bell so you won't miss what's coming. And tell me in the comments, what boundary do you need to set today to protect your peace? It can be small or big, but writing it down will be the first step to making it real. A boundary is an act of self-love, and like every act of love, it's uncomfortable at first but liberating in the end. It's like pruning a tree. Cutting seems painful, but it allows it to grow stronger. And the same happens in your life. Each boundary you set cuts off a diseased branch so your peace can bloom. The most powerful thing is understanding that boundaries don't come from rage, they come from clarity. When you set a boundary out of fury, it becomes a hostile barrier. But when you set it out of serenity, it becomes a sacred border. A boundary is the most silent and firm declaration that your life belongs to you. You are not a prisoner of expectations, nor a slave to ego, nor a victim of the broken mirror, nor a hostage to resentment. Each boundary is a rampart that protects your inner garden so that life can bloom within it. And here comes the inevitable question. What happens when you learn to set boundaries, but still find your mind is programmed with old patterns of anger and reaction? How can you rewrite the way your mind processes each situation? That will be the topic of the next lesson, rewriting your mind. Because setting boundaries protects your peace from the outside, but you need to transform your internal programming to protect it from the inside. And when you achieve both, your life changes forever. Lesson 8. Rewriting your mind. Remember the first time you learned to write. Your letters were crooked, unsure, sometimes illegible. But with practice, your hand began to flow, and what was once a conscious effort became natural. The mind works the same way. What you repeat becomes habit, and what becomes habit ends up being your way of seeing the world. Anger, resentment, lack of boundaries. All of that is nothing more than repeated writing inside you. But here's the good news. Just as you learn to write, you can relearn. You can rewrite your mind. Every thought leaves a mark like ink on a page. If you always think, they underestimate me, they ignore me, they don't respect me, Your mind fills its pages with those phrases until they seem like absolute truths. And what begins as a single idea becomes a whole book you repeat every day. But if you decide to change the pen and write new phrases, little by little the pages of your mind begin to transform. Think of it in everyday terms. A person who always reacts with anger because they learned that's how you defend yourself. Another who always keeps quiet because they were taught their voice didn't matter. Another who never trusts because an old betrayal dictated that everyone fails. None of those reactions are innate. They are phrases someone wrote in their mind and that they repeated until they believed them their own. The power lies in realizing you are not your old script. You are not your automatic anger, nor your resigned silence, nor your stored resentment. You are the writer who can take a new pen and write differently. But of course, rewriting isn't easy. Because the mind, like an old notebook, already has its pages filled with scribbles. And if you lack patience, you think it's impossible to change them. The Stoics understood this deeply. They said, "We cannot choose what life gives us, but we can choose how we interpret what happens." That interpretation is your pen. And every time you choose a different thought, even a small one, you're correcting a word, rearranging a sentence, changing the direction of the story. Rewriting your mind doesn't happen in a single day. It's like training a muscle. If you spent years writing the word anger, you won't erase it in an instant. But you can begin today to write calm, again and again, until your mind, like the hand that learns to write, does it naturally. Imagine your mind as a garden full of weeds. If every day you pull out a little, little by little spaces appear to plant flowers. Each new thought is a seed. At first it seems insignificant, but with consistency, it becomes a root, a stem, a fruit. And suddenly, where there were thorns before, peace blooms. What's curious is that many people wait to feel before rewriting. They say, "When I feel calm, I'll change my way of thinking." But it works the other way around. You change your way of thinking, and then you feel calm. The mind is like a river. If you decide to open a new channel, the water will start to flow there. At first it's a small thread, but over time it becomes a powerful current. Think of examples. That person who always thought, "I'm a victim of what they did to me," until one day they decided to write, "I am a student of what I lived," and in that change, their story stopped being tragedy and became teaching. Or that other person who repeated, "Everyone abandons me," until they chose to write, "Now I know how to choose who stays." Life didn't change overnight, but their gaze did, and with it, everything began to transform. Rewriting your mind requires 3 clear steps: recognize, replace, and repeat. Recognize what you've been writing without realizing it. Phrases of anger, resentment, defeat. Replace them with new phrases of calm, strength, dignity, and repeat them until they're engraved like the old ones. It isn't enough to write once. You need to fill page after page with your new story. The Stoics proposed daily exercises to train this inner writing. Marcus Aurelius wrote constant reminders in his Meditations. "Today I will meet difficult people, but none can harm me unless I allow it." That phrase, repeated, was his way of rewriting his mind each day before facing life. You can do the same. You don't need complex phrases, just reminders that guide your pen in the direction you want to go. What's interesting is that the mind doesn't distinguish between what you repeat because it's true and what you repeat because you want it to be true. If you repeat it consistently, it engraves it all the same. It's like learning a song. At first you don't understand it, but with so many repetitions you end up knowing it by heart. The same happens with thoughts. What would happen if you discovered that your anger isn't yours, but just a badly learned song you can stop singing? What would happen if you understood that your resentment isn't essence, but just an old paragraph you can cross out and replace? The idea that you can rewrite your mind changes everything, because it gives you back the power you thought you'd lost. Think of it like software. Your mind comes with programs installed from childhood, some useful, others full of errors. And every automatic reaction you have is nothing more than a program running in the background. Anger is a learned code, fear too, distrust as well. But like any software, you can update it. You don't need to stick with the old version if it no longer serves you. What is curious is that many prefer to keep the old program because it is what they know. Even if it makes them suffer, it feels safe. But the safety of the familiar isn't always freedom. Rewriting your mind requires courage because it involves stepping into the unknown, trying new thoughts, acting differently. Think about it. Someone who always exploded with shouts one day chooses to be silent and breathe. That act, which seems simple, is rewriting in action. Another person who always carried resentments one day says, "I will give it no more space in my mind." That decision, repeated, becomes a new narrative. Thus, each small change is a new sentence in the book of your life. But here arises the big question: how do you maintain consistency in this process? Because anyone can write a new phrase one day. The hard part is filling the entire notebook. The answer lies in daily discipline. And that's where the Stoics were masters. Their practice wasn't a momentary emotion. It was constant training. Marcus Aurelius wrote every morning. Epictetus reminded his students every day that their freedom depended on their judgments, not on circumstances. Rewriting the mind isn't a one-off act. It's a daily practice. Like a muscle, like the art of writing. The power of this process is that you don't need to wait years to see changes. Sometimes a single new phrase can open a different horizon. I'm not a victim, I'm a learner. I'm not weak, I'm resilient. I don't depend on anger, I depend on my calm. Those phrases repeated change the way you walk, speak, and look. What's curious is that when the mind begins to receive new writing, it also begins to erase the old. Not all at once, but gradually. The memories are still there, but they don't carry the same weight. It is like a library where the harmful books move to the back while the new ones take the front. Here we reach the deepest point. Rewriting your mind isn't just changing words. It is changing identity. Because with every new thought, with every different mental habit, you are rewriting who you are. And when you understand you're not a prisoner of your old script, you regain your greatest freedom, choosing who you will be from now on. What happens when your mind is already being rewritten, but you still face a world that doesn't change with you? What happens when your inner calm collides with people and environments that insist on dragging you back into anger? That will be the topic of the next lesson, the battle with the environment. Because it is useless to rewrite your mind if you don't learn to uphold your new script in a world that still speaks the language of anger. Lesson 9. The battle with the environment. When a river changes its course, the stones and branches that once seemed harmless become obstacles trying to divert it back again. That's what happens when you begin to rewrite your mind. The environment, accustomed to your old flow, tries to drag you back to the same old ways. The people who knew you in your previous version are surprised by your calm, unsettled by your silence, and try to provoke you to see if you're still the same. The world around you doesn't always celebrate your transformation. Sometimes it challenges it, sometimes it tests it. The real challenge is not only changing on the inside, but maintaining that change in the midst of an environment that still speaks the language of anger. Because you don't live in a monastery far from noise. You live in a home full of voices, in a workplace with tensions, on streets filled with impatience, in relationships that carry their own broken mirrors and backpacks of resentment. That's your battlefield, not only in your mind but in constant interaction with others. Think of daily life. You decide that today you won't get angry, that you'll keep calm. You leave home and transportation is late. Someone cuts in line. At work, a coworker complains without reason. In your family, someone makes a sarcastic comment. Each situation is like a spark looking to ignite what in you no longer wants to burn. And that's where your decision is put to the test. The environment, without meaning to, is the most honest exam of your transformation. Because you can read books, repeat phrases, write reflections. But if at the moment of provocation, you return to your old pattern, your rewriting still needs more practice. The environment isn't your enemy, though it may seem so. It's your gym. Every provocation is a weight that strengthens your inner muscle if you decide to lift it with calm. The Stoics understood this well. They said, "We cannot choose what happens outside, but we can choose how we respond inside." The environment is that outside you don't control, but which reveals how much control you have over yourself. Because if your peace depends on everything around you being perfect, you will never have peace. But if your peace remains even when everything around you is disordered, then you have discovered true freedom. Imagine a stormy sea. The waves hit hard, the wind roars, the sky darkens, weak ships sink. But a ship with a good anchor and a steady helm withstands the storm until it passes. That is you in the midst of your environment. If your anchor is set in your inner calm, the waves may strike, but they won't sink you. The environment will always try to test your new language. If before you reacted with anger and now you choose silence, someone will try to see whether it's real or just a pose. If before you always gave in and now you set boundaries, someone will get upset and accuse you of having changed. And yes, you have changed. But what for them is discomfort, for you is liberation. What would happen if you discovered that the environment does not change because it expects you to be its reflection? When you choose a different path, you no longer serve as a mirror for its anger, impatience, and noise. And that absence of reflection unsettles them, because it shows them something they are not yet willing to see in themselves. Think of clear scenes. That relative who always looks for a fight and suddenly finds that you no longer respond the same way. That coworker who fed off your outbursts and now receives only calm. That driver who expects your insult and runs into your silence. Each one is thrown off balance because their script expected your usual reaction. And when you don't give it, the script breaks. The environment can also be a disguised teacher. Each provocation reminds you that the battle isn't outside, but inside. Because if you truly master your interior, it doesn't matter what happens around you. You don't react, you choose. You aren't dragged, you decide. But here a deep challenge appears. What to do when the environment not only provokes you, but insists on crossing your boundaries? What to do when your calm seems to invite others to abuse it? The answer lies in the combination: calm plus firmness. The environment respects not only the one who keeps quiet, but the one who keeps quiet and holds their position with clarity. You don't need to shout to set a boundary, but you do need to maintain it without backing down. And that, in the end, generates respect. What's curious is that the more you practice your calm in the midst of the environment, the more people will start to notice it. Some will mock you, yes, but others will come and ask how you do it. And there you will discover that your change is not only for you, but becomes an example. Because peace is contagious, even if it doesn't seem so. The environment will never cease to be chaotic. There will always be traffic, difficult people, injustices, out-of-place comments. But your battle is not against all that. Your battle is against your impulse to let yourself be dragged by it. And every time you choose not to, you win a silent victory. Here is another metaphor. Your mind is like a fortress in the middle of a noisy city. You can't silence the noise outside, but you can close your windows so it doesn't invade your interior. That decision, repeated, gives you freedom. And now comes the big question, the one that leads us to the next lesson. What happens when you not only resist the environment, but learn to influence it? What happens when your calm not only protects you, but begins to transform the atmosphere around you? That will be the topic of the next lesson, the power to influence. Because the true master of anger is not the one who only protects themselves from the environment, but the one who, through their presence, manages to change the environment with them.